It's Tuesday of week 12. We're going to spend some time today with data displays and infographics, and then you're going to create your own infographic for our last class activity, activity 5, which is due by 5 o'clock today, uploaded to the Dropbox inside our D2L week 12 Tuesday folder. So in this video, I'm going to talk a bit about different types of data displays, when to use them, and what rhetorical work they do. And then I'm going to toggle over to briefly talk about infographics and provide an overview of activity 5. First, let's talk about displaying data. We are constantly being presented data in our everyday lives. Think about the ways in which data about the election were shared across spaces and places. This is a set of graphics captured from CNN on November 9th and from Fox News. My family doesn't celebrate Christmas, but instead we each do something good around Christmas time. For the past few years, I've donated to heifer.org, which is an international nonprofit that focuses on providing communities in the U.S. and around the world with tools, training, equipment, and animals for sustainable food production. This is a data display from their 2019 annual report in which they're reporting on their expenses. Here's another data display, a bar chart that includes the actual daily income of someone in Nicaragua in 2019 and also the living income benchmark. Here's another data display, a table presenting specifics about activities, expenses, and losses. This is the curriculum page from the eShip website. This is essentially a display of data. Here, the information is different classes and it's represented in a table. I also regularly create data displays. This is from a series I created called This Week in Charts, and it presents man stuff on our kitchen table. I'd like you to find a data display in action. Specifically, pause this video and return to the organization for which you performed your Module 1 visual communication audit. Look through the documents you gathered to see if you can find a data display and consider the rhetorical work it's doing. If you didn't collect any documents that presented data displays, I'd suggest you see if you can find the 2019 annual report of the organization or company you focused on. Some initial considerations regarding data displays. You shouldn't be surprised that we always want to start our data display design work with these key rhetorical considerations: audience, purpose, and context. Who is this data for? What does your audience want? What do you want from them? What's the most important takeaway you need to convey with the data display? And context, where will your audience see and interpret the data display? And more. Think about the specific context of your audience, and context can include the physical location in which they're seeing and interacting with the data, attitudinal, and their use of the data. And of course, CRAP is a great set of tools to lean on when creating data displays. With those rhetorical considerations in mind, let's explore the anatomy of an example chart. We have our axes and our data points. Some graphs or charts or data displays include trend lines or plots. One of the most important elements of any data display are the labels and also the titles. And then there's chart junk or clutter, which generally you want to try to minimize when creating data displays. Knowing this anatomy and some of the vocabulary of data displays is really helpful when you're creating them in Word or Excel. Let's get a bit more specific and talk about different types of data displays and when to use them. First, tables, which are used to represent complex data in columns and rows, or as an underlying grid to arrange information. Those are the only two instances in which you would create a table to display information. And the periodic table is a great example. Here's another example table showing the economic impact of the craft supply industry in Michigan. Imagine if you were presented this data in paragraph form. It'd be pretty much impossible to read. Another example, suggesting which type of wood to use to smoke what type of food. This is a U.S. Census table reporting population estimates by state between 2010 and 2016. Again, imagine navigating this information in paragraph format. It'd be impossible to understand. This is a table used as a way to arrange information. I had surgery to remove a brain tumor a few years ago, and the surgery was going to be anywhere between 6 to 18 hours. And I created activity packs for my family so they wouldn't get bored. And this is a Sparrow Hospital scavenger hunt with items by point. Okay, from tables to pie charts. Pie charts are used to represent portions or pieces or slices of a whole, and that whole is always 100%. Here's a chart showing us how surveys were administered by percentage on each day. The sum of the percentages should be 100%. Here's a set of pie charts from PBS Wisconsin's 2019 fiscal report presenting revenues and expenses. This is a pie chart from a study done a few years ago on campus about tap water. And another from a Target 2019 annual report showing sales across categories. And this is a type of pie chart often called a donut chart. This is a pie chart breaking down a student's typical 24-hour day, and you can see a feature that Word and Excel both allow, embedding photos under specific areas or slices within a chart. From tables to pie charts to bar charts. Simple bar charts present and compare one data group. This is from a 2019 Target fiscal report, each chart showing one area and then the change in that area over time. This is from MSU's COVID testing dashboard, presenting results reported from the Ingham County Health Department. This is presenting really old data, but I wanted to include this chart because it shows a pretty important feature, specifically that the 2010 number is a goal and not a real number. If you are in any way representing a projection, a goal, or an estimate in a data display, you should visually distinguish it clearly from the actual data. Here we see the 2010 label is italicized, the data is represented in a lighter teal color, and there's a double hash mark breaking the real data from the goal. Complex bar charts just represent more than one data group. Simple bar charts compare across one data group. Complex bar charts compare across multiple. Here's a complex bar chart from a Pew Research Center study in 2016 on book reading, comparing activities by age group. This is a chart comparing MSU's diversity numbers in ethnicity, gender, geography, and overall to a national average. Of course, what we don't know from this chart is how the diversity score was calculated. This is from a company's internal analysis report of how often projects actually made their documented goals, showing an increase in 2015 and 2016 in missed deadlines. Line graphs plot or show interval data over time. Often the data could be accurately presented using a bar chart or a line graph, depending on what's being emphasized. Line graphs often allow us to more easily see visual trends. Here's a line graph showing S&P data. Here's one presenting actual and predicted data about high school graduation rates to 2029. I would argue that this requires some explanation about the fact that the data presented from 2020, 2021 to 2028, 2029 should be somehow visually different, as it's not actual data, but a projection. Organizational charts show hierarchy. Here's one of the makeup of the U.S. Department of Justice. A really complex one showing the United Nations system. And an interestingly designed one showing the organization of MSU Student Affairs and Services. Data maps use space to visually represent data. Here we have one showing the number of millions of people who voted early in the 2020 election. And another showing 2017 data about how much each state collects in sales tax per capita. And another showing the number of University Research Corridor alumni in Michigan by county. And you really see a typical data map convention here. The more saturated areas or areas with higher numbers are presented in a darker color. Finally, we have pictograms or pictographs where data is represented by pictures. Here's one showing the number of people in each age category. Of course, what the number of people in each age category did represent or show is unknown. We need the larger context, the document in which this data display appeared, to figure that out. Here's a pictograph representing the number of countries visited by an average citizen from each country. So this is a really general representation, but not an actual presentation of numerical quantitative data. So let's look at some bad data displays. This one is terrible. The labels are almost impossible to read. The arrangement of information really doesn't make much sense. This one is a great illustration, I think, of the principle that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. The 3D effects completely obscure the information, and the flattened text make it really hard to associate text labels with actual data. This is just a misuse of charts. Pie chart should be used to show percentages and a total of 100%, but there's no actual percentages here. And this is a poor way to represent the data. What is this supposed to be telling us or showing us? Let's say you're in charge of purchasing the beverage supplies for your office and you want to know what you should order and how much you should order. If the chart is supposed to show us trends in overall consumption, a pie chart would be better used. This shows us clearly that coffee is consumed more than other beverages, and the coffee order should be much larger than the order of other beverages. If for whatever reason you need to know what's drank when, this shows us that water stays about the same across a week, but coffee consumption really increases across each week. This is a visual mess for a couple of reasons, but the one that I think bugs me the most is it's hard to read the labels. We might presume that Surveyor versus Ripe is the title, but because it's the same font and size and almost embedded inside the chart itself, it's really unclear. So those are some mistakes to avoid when creating data displays. I also want to share some of the ways you can lie with data displays, specifically so that you can be a more critical reader of the way data is displayed to you. First, keep an eye out for scaling. Large scaling like this, from 0 to 100, when all of the numbers are between 80 to 100, hides changes, and we might see sales are stable. Whereas dramatically small scaling, here from 88 to 94, really emphasizes changes. The level of detail can either obscure or reveal important information. This simple bar chart would make us think our sales were much better this month compared to last, which they were. But if we break that data down by salesperson, for instance, we see that overall, although we did better in sales, Avalos had a really good month, whereas Noonan did not. And one last example, there's no title or clear labels here, so we don't really know what's being represented. This title provides a key clue as to what we're seeing. And a good general rule, again, is just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. Formatting options, again, can obscure, overemphasize, or underemphasize information. We're in a cultural moment where infographics have become an incredibly popular way to share data. And there are a few key differences between data displays and infographics. Data displays usually just display one chunk of data. They at least appear, although I think the examples I just shared call this into question, as an objective conduit of information. They're often generated automatically from data input into Word or Excel or pulling data from a dashboard. Infographics, on the other hand, often contain multiple data displays and usually combine text, illustrations, and icons. Infographics typically subjectively tell a story and have a progression of information, and infographics are usually manually compiled and created. To return to CNN's presidential election info, I'd actually argue that in its entirety, this is an infographic made up of a bar chart, a data map, and a second bar chart. I included a couple of infographics in last week, Thursday's video about what Illustrator is used for. This is an infographic that presents information about what happened every minute of the day in 2019. For instance, every minute in 2019, Twitch users viewed 1 million videos. Every minute of the day in 2019, more than 18 million texts were sent. And here's another example infographic representing diversity in children's books as of 2012. The researchers reviewed 3,600 kids' books and found that 93% of characters were white. There are some great tutorials out there to learn how to create infographics in Adobe Illustrator, but as you're finding out working on Module 5, Illustrator is a huge app with a big learning curve. And honestly, it's likely you can create the infographics you might need to create for your internship or your job using different building tools. And that's just what we're going to do for our last class activity. For Activity 5, you'll use a tool called PictoChart to create an infographic. You can also use Canva if you prefer. I've had a PictoChart account for more than 10 years now, and I have never received any charges, any spam, any upgrade requirements from them. So I'm pretty comfortable asking you to create a PictoChart account. What you're going to do is create that free account and either create your own infographic or use a template available on PictoChart. Your infographic should present a day in your life. That is the 3 or 4 main activities that take up the most time in an average day for you. When you're done, you want to download your infographic as a PNG or JPEG and upload it to the Dropbox in D2L inside the Week 12 Tuesday folder. Here's an example I created, and I did this both conceptually, that is without specific hours or percentages, and aspirationally. This is a dream day, not an actual typical day. Here's another example, and rather than create an infographic of her average day, the student described how she anticipated spending Thanksgiving meeting her parents' new cat. So we've covered data displays and when and how they're used and explored infographics. Your next step, again, is activity 5, creating your own infographic representing a day in your life. Please upload your infographic as a PNG or JPEG to the Dropbox and D2L in the Week 12 Tuesday folder by 5 o'clock today. I hope this also inspires you to do some data display sleuthing and exploring. Go back to the docs you collected for Module 1. Look specifically for data displays. Keep an eye out for data displays in the documents you encounter this week. Keep an eye out for infographics and the story that they're telling with data, with text, with graphics, and more. And keep working on Module 5 and plan to share a draft for workshopping this week, Thursday.